Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, over at FalcFans.com. I'm joined by my good friend Scott Karasik at Blocking Dirty. All right, we're going to be coming to you live on election night. You guys can check us out. Get your mind off of the election, whatever your politics are. We'll be recapping the Falcons Week 6. I'm sorry, I'm getting caught up in the weeks.
You're like Week 9.
Yeah. Week 9 review of the Buccaneers, and we'll preview the Week 10 matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll also be doing a little bit of mid-season recap of looking at some of the NFL 1000 grades over at Bleacher Report. And we'll be talking a little bit more in depth about some controversial figures in Falcons land, and Brian Cox, Rashid Hageman, and Jalen Collins. And, of course, we'll be answering you guys' mailbag questions throughout the show. So, as we usually do when we start this thing up, we talk about the recent roster moves. It's a good sign that the Falcons, didn't have a big move in regards to Desmond Trufant today. I guess it's a positive sign. No news is good news, but I guess we'll find out over the next week to get an injury update on sort of his status for the rest of the season. Things aren't exactly promising, but we'll basically pretend that because we haven't heard an update, everything's going to be just fine. But
or the Falcons are going to be out Desmond Trufant for this week, and we'll get him back after the bye. Which in that case, it's still all good. Everything's fine. The house isn't burning down.
Exactly. So the one move the Falcons did make today, quiet move, was swapping out a player on the practice squad. They picked up former Baylor offensive guard Blake Muir. Muir? I guess that's how
I don't even know, man. It's a guard on the practice squad.
And they cut Davis Toll, your boy. Any thoughts on this move, Scott?
They needed a guard on the practice squad because they only had, 3. They only really had 4 backup offensive linemen, so they needed that guard to round out the backup group.
Yeah, I mean, since they've basically been playing Ben Garland on defense, having another body on the interior probably wouldn't hurt them at this point. So, generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of Big 12 offensive linemen outside of the Oklahoma. That conference really hasn't produced very good NFL offensive linemen, particularly Baylor, as they've had a number of high-profile blockers the last couple of years that all have fizzled out in the NFL. So, maybe Muir is the exception to the rule, but I don't have an opinion on him. So
he's pretty athletic, but I mean, he's an offensive lineman that's on the practice squad. Don't expect much out of him after this year, outside of maybe a camp body for next season. I'm not expecting anything out of Blake Muir. I know you're probably not expecting much out of Blake Muir.
Yeah.
He's kind of just a guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's generally what happens when you're from the Big 12. So unless you play for Oklahoma.
Yeah.
At least he's from Baylor, not Texas. I don't think Texas has had an offensive lineman drafted in 8 years. So, I think Blaylock might have been the last one drafted. Whatever. Doesn't matter. Let's move on. Let's talk about this Buccaneers win. Falcons dominated the Bucs on Thursday night, 143-28. Some of the key stats from the game, they were very efficient in the red zone, went 4 for 5. They were able to effectively run the ball, 138 yards on the ground on design runs, 6 for 10 on third downs, 2 takeaways led to 6 points. They had a giveaway that wound up costing them 7, so it was a net loss. But it was nice to see this defense start to be a little bit more opportunistic. That has been a missing ingredient for this defense, and certainly would help them be a little bit better statistically. So, clearly a sort of a one-sided performance. It was a little tight in the first half between the Falcons and the Bucs, a little back and forth. But the third quarter pretty much sealed the win for the Falcons. They dominated that quarter, possessed the ball for 11 out of the 15 minutes in that quarter. think they had what 2 scoring drives, 2 touchdown drives. So that was it for the Bucs at that point. Scott, you got any other major takeaways from the game?
I mean, it was about as complete of a game as we'll see from the Falcons, outside of losing Trufant to injury. I thought it was a great game. There were probably 2 bad defensive drives before the game was sealed up. It was like 43-14 or 43-21. And then the Falcons were basically like, all right, we're going to drop into a pure prevent and let them score a touchdown just to waste time. And, I mean, yeah, I know you're probably saying, yeah, it wasn't really a real prevent, but, like, they were rushing 3 and dropping they were rushing 3 and dropping 8 on pretty much every play on that drive that Glennon threw a touchdown on. So,
it was more of a nitpick. You wish that they would play a little bit harder towards the end to finish the game. Dan Quinn's always talking about finishing, and you want to see that reflected and not sort of just let Mike Glennon go 9 for 10 or whatever he was on that drive. But it's a small issue.
It really is. It really is a very small issue.
You look at some of the matchups we highlighted last week. We were talking, probably the only matchup that really was problematic for the Falcons was the matchup with Mike Evans. He really had a big game. I think he finished with 150 yards. So, we thought Trufant would shadow him. We wondered if Trufant would shadow him. He did early. Then he got hurt. Then Alford was primarily responsible for shadowing him the rest of the game. Collins got a couple of snaps against him. But for the most part, I think Alford struggled a little bit in that game. Trufant had, gave up some of the receptions. I don't think he really struggled, but certainly, wasn't exactly shutting down Mike Evans. But outside of that, the Falcons pretty much handled all their matchups. They were able to run the ball effectively. We sort of expected them to do that. They didn't let the big plays that plagued them in week 1, in particular, Anton Smith sort of carved them up. Anton had a couple of nice runs, but he then got knocked out of the game later. It really wasn't a major factor. And we were able to put a decent amount of pressure on Jameis Winston. So for the most part, the Falcons took care of business, as we said earlier. So, all around a very good night for the Falcons.
I agree. I mean, it was just a good overall game. It's great when you get to see the Falcons actually play pretty much a complete game too. I mean, I haven't seen a game that good since the Carolina game from this team.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. I was just gonna nitpick and say maybe the Denver game, but it's fine. Always got to undermine any point that you say, Scott. So it's fine. You're right.
I'm used to it by now. We've been doing this show for what?
3 years? 3.5?
Yeah.
So
this might be the first winning team we've had with this show.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. Some of the standout individual performances, we mentioned a couple of guys. I thought Adrian Claiborne had a really good game. Taylor Gabriel showed up. Julio Jones, obviously. Matt Ryan, obviously. Austin Hooper had a nice first start. Devontae played well. There really wasn't anybody that really played poorly, and certainly certain players did rise to the occasion and really shined for the most part. Were there any other individual players that you felt were worthy of highlighting or low-lighting, I guess, Scott?
I thought Jalen Collins did well. First real action of the year. I thought he was shadowing well in coverage. I thought he did a solid job going against Evans when he did go against him. Just something about size against size on the outside is always nice to have. having a guy who's 6'2", 212 pounds go up against a guy who's 6'5", 230 pounds makes that matchup a lot easier to deal with. I'm just glad that Collins, looked good. Do I expect him to be a beast this year or expect him to be great? No. I'm expecting him to look pretty bad anytime he sees the field just because I thought he got beat out by Goodwin. But if he can look like he did against Mike Evans against the big receivers, that might be enough to get him a starting job next year and make me feel good about letting Alford go. Because if Collins can play like he does and basically shadow big receivers, and then Trufant shadows everybody else, or shadows all the number ones, I think the Falcons will be in good standing next year.
Okay. Now, what are your thoughts on the possibility? I know you've mentioned this before, and others have asked this question. What are your thoughts on Jalen Collins as a sort of insurance policy at free safety potentially?
I mean, I like him. I think he's got the ability to play it, to do zone coverage. When you were like, yeah, his run defense wasn't good from what I've seen last year, he looked good this past week. He was setting the edge well. He was fighting off the wide receiver blocks pretty well. He laid into Jameis Winston. I thought it was Keanu Neal who hit Winston at first. That's how nice of a hit that was.
Mm-hmm.
And stopped 2 points right there. So do I think that he could do it? Yeah. Do I think he should do it? I don't know. I mean, if Allen keeps playing like one of the worst safeties in the NFL, sure.
Okay. Yeah, it was. I think it was a nice step up for him in terms of being effective or at least competent in run support on Thursday. I think he still needs to prove it consistently because he was god awful in run support last year. Probably depending on how you feel about Paul Warlow, he was probably the second worst player on the team, on the defense last year with run support. Obviously we have a different opinion on sort of how.
I think Warlow was better than Jalen Collins in run support last year.
Okay.
I'm not saying much, but I do think Warlow was better than Jalen Collins in run support last year.
It's probably a fair statement. That's why I said depending on how you feel about Warlow. If you're one of those people that thinks Paul Warlow is the worst football player that ever walked the face of the earth, then you probably think Jalen Collins was better than him. But if you don't have that opinion, then you probably will put Warlow, just a smidge ahead of Jalen Collins. But I know we have differing opinions on sort of how well or poorly Ricardo Allen is playing. I know apparently I seem to be in the minority of that opinion, that I think his play has been fine this year. Jalen Collins wouldn't be the first choice in terms of who I would look to replace him there. I think his sort of fit in this scheme is really outside corner or nothing at all. But I think if we're looking at a cornerback that could potentially challenge Ricardo Allen for a starting spot next year, I would look at Brian Poole. He played free safety this summer. That really was sort of his projection coming out of Florida. In my opinion, the only real issue he had was sort of his lack of size. But I think he was a very similar prospect to Ricardo Allen, probably a little more physical in terms of his ability to defend the run and play a little closer to the line of scrimmage than Ricardo Allen was coming out of Purdue. But by and large, very similar players. So I would look at Brian Poole. If you're looking for somebody on the team that could potentially push or replace Ricardo Allen, I think it would be Poole, not Collins. But I know other people might feel differently.
I know I'm going to sound a bit crazy to you here, but I'm expecting, or I'm hoping for for the first round pick to be Hooker out of Ohio State.
Okay. I watched a little bit of Malik Hooker. he kind of reminds me of Demarius Randall a little bit. So I see why people sort of see him as a potential late first round pick. I think he's probably a little bit more physical than Randall, but my grandmother's probably a little bit more physical than Demarius Randall. I think he's very young. Like, he's only really played 1 year. So I would very much question whether he's ready to come in and right away be the quarterback of our secondary. But I do see why people like him. I don't see him as this sort of special safety prospect right now. Maybe in a couple of years with a few more years of development, I could see where people come on that. But I wouldn't be upset if we took him in the first round, but I think there are probably better players out there and better values at that point. But he's fine. But I have a pro Ricardo Allen bias, so that's what we say. Scott, you want to move ahead to talk about this Eagles game?
Yeah, definitely.
So the Falcons are going back on the road after a nice little home stand. The Eagles are 3-4. The Eagles are 3-0 at home. They've lost all their road games. They've won all their home games. And all four of their losses have come by one score. They were in each game. So this is a team that's probably better than their record, but also is sort of a team that you can't really nail down in terms of how consistent they are, because
are they better than their record?
I'm saying like they
because look at who their wins are against. Yeah, they beat the Browns. Yeah, they beat the Bears. They beat the Steelers, and the Steelers are looking like a mediocre team. Their win against the Vikings, that was a good win, but the Vikings have no offense. So I don't know how good this Eagles team really is.
Well, I think I think when you look at sort of their road struggles, and particularly last week against the Giants, they got off to a very slow start. I think that's common when you have a rookie quarterback. People, will remember, you go back and you look at Matt Ryan's early road starts in 2008, and he was pretty bad in those games. So, I think part of it is that, and I think with young quarterbacks, they tend to be very much more comfortable at home. And I think, probably overall, yeah, the Eagles aren't a great team, but I do think, they're a team that a couple of breaks here and there, we could be talking about, a 5-2 sort of team. And I don't think people would be overlooking them as easy. It reminds me similar to the sort of San Diego game where people looked at San Diego's record and said, oh, yeah, they're not good. Falcons will have no problem with that. And, we obviously lost that game. So I think going on the road into Philadelphia, I think will be a bigger challenge than probably people think. Not to suggest that I think the Falcons are somehow incapable of winning this game and potentially winning this game handily. But I do think the Eagles do have some challenges that they could present to the Falcons that could give them a little bit of trouble. Now, we should talk about the injuries. The Falcons, we talked about Desmond Trufant dealing with that shoulder injury. We don't have an update on him, but, all signs point to, at the very minimum, him being out this week. But, we'll find out officially tomorrow when we've already done the show, so we can't really give anybody an update on that. Tevin Coleman still dealing with his hamstring injury. His status for this week, unless you've heard something, Scott, it's still pretty much up in the air, right?
Everything I've seen, everything I've heard has said that there's no definitive either way. Yeah. So, again, hoping that this week it just means that Trufant is out for this week, and then next week it's the bye, and then the week after the Falcons are at home and he comes back. That seems like the best case scenario. If it's something like a torn labrum, he's probably out for the year, which kind of sucks because you need Desmond Trufant, but I feel like the Falcons could get by without him. I don't think he's been playing well, but I don't think he's been playing at the same level that he did before.
That's a fair statement. I think the Falcons can get by without him because they have the number one offense. I do think this defense can get a lot worse than it has been, and I think if he is out for the rest of the season, I think we'll see that because I think their Achilles heel is always sort of the big play that they allow, and we know that Trufant is certainly, he's probably gotten beat on a couple more big plays this year than normal, but he's still probably one of the more trustworthy guys that you can expect is not going to get gashed down the field. I don't know about Jalen Collins. I'm optimistic based off of his play on Thursday, but for this game, I don't think the Eagles really present a major challenge. But some of these teams that will play later on this season, I do think it could be a little bit more of an issue. I do feel like losing Trufant won't be a back-breaking issue for the Falcons, but I do think we will feel it. Maybe not to a huge degree in the regular season, but certainly if we don't have them for the playoffs, then, it will be a massive loss.
I agree.
But on the other injury issues, basically, I haven't heard anything to suggest that Coleman, Trufant, Tammy, or Freeney are going to be back this week. So I don't really have anything to say other than there's probably a good chance that all those guys could miss another week or two until we get an update from Wednesday's practice. But if you've heard anything differently, Scott, then by all means share it.
No, we're all going to wait till tomorrow. On Friday, I'll put my injury report article out there, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so, at this point in time, I'm assuming that none of those guys are going to play this week. Hopefully we get some of them back, but if not, I think we can, we've been okay so far, so I feel like we can get through. Trufant's going to be the one loss that's, going to be a little bit more problematic, but, the other guys obviously do have roles with this team, and certainly having Coleman, Tammy, or Freeney out there would certainly help the Falcons' chances. Particularly, I would love to see a Dwight Freeney versus Jason Peters matchup. That's two potential Hall of Famers going up against each other, not in the primes of their career, but they've both shown that they got a little bit something left in the tank. So, Peters is also dealing with an injury. He's got a thumb injury. Brent Selleck for the Eagles, the tight end, broken ribs. Terrence Brooks, the safety, hamstring. Taylor Hart, the ankle. Caleb Sturridge, the kicker, has a leg injury. Probably the biggest injury is Benny Logan, who's dealing with the groin. He's not going to play this week. That's going to make it a little bit easier for us to run up the middle. They still have Fletcher Cox, so it's not as if it's going to be easy. But Benny Logan is probably their most consistent run defender on that defensive line. So that helps the Falcons if he's not going to be playing this week.
It wouldn't be shocking to see the Falcons run a lot of inside trap. Just because the inside trap could get them that blocker and that leverage, that basically two guards on Fletcher Cox. And basically just seeing, hey, where's Fletcher Cox? We're going to pick the side based on where he's at and go from there. Bo Allen, I guarantee you Alex Mack could run Bo Allen up and down the field. That guy, he's big, he's strong, but he's slow. And he does not get good leverage. And I think if you had Mack going against Bo Allen, that makes that spot so much easier. And with Fletcher Cox playing basically a three-tech every play, there's ways to scheme around it and to get that rush right up the middle. And a lot of trapping guards is what I'm expecting. Or for use of a better word, it's a pulling guard that hits the inside, if for those that aren't super football literate.
Yeah, you're right. The drop-off from Benny Logan to Bo Allen is pretty big. Bo Allen is a decent rotational player, but you're right. Alex Mack shouldn't have too much problems with Bo Allen. Benny Logan would be a significant challenge for him. As we've seen, good nose tackles have given him a little bit of fits at times this year, and Benny Logan is definitely a good nose tackle. He destroyed Mike Person, which isn't saying a whole lot, but he did give our offensive line a little bit of trouble in week one of last year. So, if the key with I think going against Philadelphia, because their interior is so good, or traditionally good when Logan and Cox are healthy, having a guy like Coleman, like we did in week 1 last year, who can get outside, made it more effective. And as people may recall, that was probably Coleman's best performance of the year, largely because of his ability to get outside. And without him having that, like, it's not to say that Devontae is not good on the outside, but that's not, he's not as good as Coleman is. But, without having Coleman, that could be an issue. But if Philadelphia is without Logan, that makes it a little bit easier for Devontae to get some room in the middle. So if we're going to miss Coleman, it's a good thing that the Eagles are going to miss Logan. That's what I'm saying. Scott, what are some of the key matchups that you're looking forward to seeing this week with the Eagles?
My favorite matchup is Vic Beasley against, I'm going to butcher the hell out of this, but I want to try and say it. Halapuli Vaati Vaitai.
Big V?
So I'm just going to call him Vaitai from here on out. But I think Beasley could destroy this guy. Slow-footed, doesn't anchor well, doesn't do well against the bull rush. Beasley's finally learning how to do a speed-to-power bull rush and collapse the line. I think if the Falcons can, avoid a bunch of chips on the outside, I think Beasley could create a lot of pressure in this game. Maybe not get a sack because the Eagles love to do this quick passing game, but I do think that Beasley can get a lot of pressure on the outside against Vaitai. A lot of pressure, and very early pressure too.
No, I definitely agree with that. This is probably going to be the easiest matchup of the season for Vic Beasley in terms of getting a guy that's probably going to be overwhelmed and getting after the quarterback. Now, I don't think, Vaitai has made incremental improvement since that disastrous start against the Redskins a couple of weeks ago. But, the one thing I noticed watching that Giants game is they often wanted Darren Sproles to chip. And I know throughout the season, when you chip Vic Beasley, he tends to struggle dealing with that. So I'll be curious to see sort of, I think this will be an opportunity if the Eagles do decide to chip quite a bit. This will be an opportunity for Beasley to show how much growth he's done on that. But it will also mean that other guys like Adrian Claiborne, like Grady Jarrett, who we finally got to see get extensive reps in the nickel sub-package last week, and even the great Courtney Upshaw will get one-on-one opportunities that with the Eagles' offensive line, Kelsey hasn't played like Jason Kelsey. Wisniewski struggled last week. Peters, as I mentioned earlier, is not healthy. I can't even remember who the right guard is off the top of my head.
Brandon Brooks has looked good.
Oh, yeah, okay. Brandon Brooks, yeah.
Brandon Brooks is the one guy on that entire offensive line that's looked good.
Yeah.
So he gets the benefit of playing against Grady Jarrett this week, who has looked like one of the top 10 defensive tackles in the league this year.
Yeah, so it's going to be, this was going to be another good litmus test for this pass rush to basically, we saw the Giants last week really get after Carson Wentz early, particularly in that game, and create a lot of pressure. And, I went back and looked at all the Eagles' losses, or several of the Eagles' losses, I should say, and looking at their last drives. And one of the issues that the Eagles had, and one of the reasons why they couldn't finish, and last week against the Giants, the Eagles had an opportunity to win that game at the end. They were down, 28-23, and they had the ball like in Giants territory. But what the Giants did is they dialed up blitzes, and they were able to basically force bad throws or throwaways from Wentz early on, and basically he only had one shot. And so it's one of those things where, like, if you can get pressure on Carson Wentz, as is often the case with rookie quarterbacks, you can certainly significantly dip his performance. And it's one of the reasons why the Eagles' passing game has revolved more around the sort of dink and dunk, short passing, easy reads, quick throws that Wentz is more effective on than sort of sitting back there and trying to throw the long ball and the intermediate routes. So I think it's something that this pass rush, if they can get things going, could really have a dramatic impact on this game for the Falcons in a positive way. So this will be another good game to see if this pass rush, are they stat padding or are they legitimately one of the 10 or 12 best pass rushes in the NFL?
I mean, I think they could be one of the top 10 pass rushes in the NFL, and I think they could show it this week. And I think they could get 6, 7, 8 sacks this week if they really show up. And if Freeney's healthy, I mean, Claiborne's finally coming into his own. Jarrett's finally coming into his own. Upshaw, I know you're not a huge Upshaw fan, but I've been pleased from what I've seen to Upshaw in the nickel package. He has looked very good as a one-technique defensive tackle. Again, when the Falcons signed him, no one thought that's what he was going to be playing. We all thought he was going to compete as strong side linebacker with Brooks Reed. Got moved inside, gained 20 pounds, probably didn't lose 20 pounds like he normally was supposed to, and said, you know what, I'm going to stay fat this year, and I'm just going to play defensive tackle. And for a defensive tackle, he's relatively quick.
Okay. I'm going to stay fat. That was an easy joke there. He's been saying that for the last 4 years, but yeah.
Yeah, but now he's not a 290-pound end. He's a 290-pound defensive tackle, and he's quick, and he uses his hands well for the most part. I mean, you don't have to sit there and teach him how to use his hands decently. So, I mean, I've been impressed with him. I don't think he's been great, but I've been impressed with the switch.
Look, he was not a pass rusher in Baltimore. I think moving him into the inside where his lack of speed is less of a detriment for him as it is on the edge has certainly helped him. I'm probably not as big a fan as his hand usage as you are. I think he has decent power though, so he can bull rush a guy. He can sort of, occasionally put a guy on skates, and occasionally you'll see a decent swim move from him. He's been effective at times. I still think the fact that we're relying on him to play 30 to 35 snaps a game is indicative of our need to get better D-tackle depth. But, at this point in time, beggars can't be choosers. So I'm fine with Courtney Upshaw for the meantime. I'll be complaining about it and cracking fat jokes for the rest of the season, as I'm wont to do, but it's fine. Now, on the flip side, to me, the intriguing matchup for me is going to be the Eagles pass rush against the Falcons offensive line. You can make an argument the Eagles probably, particularly if Logan was healthy, but even without Logan, they have probably one of the top 3 or 4 best defensive lines in the NFL.
I agree with that.
And I think it's been a big reason why their pass defense has been so effective this year. They're number 1 in pass defense in DVOA. They're number 5 in passing yards, number 5 in defensive passer rating. They really struggled. The secondary looked really bad. Or let me rephrase: Leotis McKelvin and Jalen Watkins looked really bad against the Giants last week.
That's because they suck.
Yeah. So their safeties are good. Malcolm Jenkins, he gave up a touchdown to Sterling Shepard, which is because he's Sterling Shepard.
Sterling Shepard's a lot better than people realize.
Yeah, and Rodney McLeod is probably one of the 5 best safeties in the NFL that a lot of people haven't heard of. But outside of those guys, I think Nolan Carroll's okay, but he hasn't played particularly well. Jalen Mills has really struggled this year. So their secondary is bad, but the reason why their pass defensive ratings are so high, I think it's largely because they can get pressure. Jim Schwartz has brought, he's probably not, Jim Washburn in terms of the wide 9, but he has certainly brought a defensive scheme that tends to play a lot of zone on the back end and can get pressure with 4. I think this is the type of defense, not to say that can stop the Falcons offense, but could be problematic for the Falcons offense because very few teams really have the type of cornerback that can hang with Julio Jones and really all receivers when you put all those guys and how well Matt Ryan is spreading the ball. So really what you want to do from a defensive standpoint is you want to be able to get pressure with 4 and drop 7 into coverage. And that will sort of mitigate some of the issues that teams have had trying to match up with our offensive weapons. And Philadelphia, probably more so than probably any other team other than maybe Seattle or Denver, probably has the front that could legitimately get pressure with 4. Fletcher Cox is Fletcher Cox. If you guys don't know how good Fletcher Cox is, then you need to start watching more football. Brandon Graham is playing out of his mind this year and is living up to all the potential that people were talking about when he came out and sort of had a slow start to his NFL career. And at some point, Chip Kelly was going to trade him, but now he's definitely made the fact that they didn't trade him seem like the greatest move ever, because I think he's like Pro Football Focus is like second highest graded edge rusher behind Von Miller, if I'm not mistaken. Vinny Curry's good. Connor Barwin, is their third edge rusher, and they can sometimes kick Curry inside and put Barwin out there on the edge. So he had 13 sacks 2 years ago. He's not an amazing player, but he does when he's your fourth best pass rusher, that's probably a good sign.
Barwin is basically that guy who magically winds up with 10 sacks in a year for 3 years of his career, and you're like, how the hell did this guy do it? He's not that great as a pass rusher, but he's a cleanup guy. He gets around his guy right when he's there. So think 2012 Troy Bierman. That 6 sacks that he had or whatever, all of them cleanup.
I would say Troy Bierman's a poor man. On Troy Bierman's best day, he's a poor man's Connor Barwin. But I see.
I'd agree, like a rich man's Bierman. But I'm saying same kind of pass rusher.
Yeah. Barwin's value is his versatility, and then part of that versatility is that he's an effort pass rusher that will make plays when you need him to make plays. I think he tipped the pass last week that wound up being an interception that gave the Eagles a chance to come back in that game. So, he always seems to show up right when, if you're an offense at the exact right time, wrong time for your offense. So, I think one of the issues with the Falcons offensive line this year is they've given up probably a lot more sacks than people would like. I think they've had some issues in terms of being in some unfavorable third and longs where guys like, Schrader and Matthews, who are going to be going up against Graham, guys like Chester, who's probably going to see a lot of Fletcher Cox on Sunday. Those are situations where if the Falcons get into some 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 9s, those are situations that really favor the Eagles pass rushers. And so I think the best way the Falcons to combat that is to be able to run the ball and stay on schedule. And I think they can run the ball against the Eagles defense, despite their D-line. They're not a great run defense. And I think that's really where this Falcons success really starts. Run the ball, make it so that our offensive line is able to get into some favorable situations, being able to play downhill and attack their defensive line as opposed to the other way around. And I think the Falcons can sort of control the game that way.
I have to agree. I mean, it's just there's so many ways for Atlanta to win this game. And I think that they match up really well with the Eagles. But it just feels like a trap game.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, Philadelphia is a much better team at home. Obviously, from the record, the Falcons have been pretty good on the road this year, arguably better on the road than they've been at home this year. But, I do think this is a game where if the Falcons aren't, if they're like, oh, well, we got a bye week and, we got some rest coming up and, they're looking ahead to the stretch run as opposed to looking to this game. They could get caught unawares and really be in a fist fight down to the wire. And if it comes down to that, then it can be anybody's game. And when we sort of saw that against San Diego to a certain extent. And, I hope that they don't overlook the Eagles in any way. So, I do think this is a favorable matchup, as you say, Scott. I think that Eagles D-line is really the only area where I think the Eagles should be able to sort of win. I know the Eagles tend to have a balanced run attack. They have a 3-headed backfield. Historically, any Falcon fan, hears the words Darren and Sproles together in the same sentence, and they immediately have flashbacks. Sproles is not the same guy that he was back in his heyday in New Orleans. but he's still Darren Sproles. He's still capable of turning a game on a dime, probably more so on special teams than he is on offense. But, you know, given our rookies and given some of the struggles and the ups and downs that they've had this year, I'm not 100% sold on them. I think they're capable of dealing with Sproles, but, you know, they got to go out there and do it. So we'll see how that goes. Scott, are there any other matchups that you're looking forward to seeing?
I mean, I feel like the Falcons, I'm just going to run through the main matchups that I'm looking at with the Eagles. I think they've gotten an edge, Falcons defensive line versus their offensive line. I think if Seelick is out, Atlanta can match up really well with Ertz and their receivers. They only have 4 receivers on the roster. And, I mean, Dorial Green-Beckham's just okay. Aguilar's okay. Matthews is okay. They run a lot out of a 3 wide receiver set out of the 11 package. I'm just not I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be an easy matchup, but I don't think it's going to be a tough matchup either, if that makes any sense. Yeah. I don't think the Eagles receivers are any good. I think Aguilar kind of sucks. I think Green-Beckham's way overrated from what we all thought he could be. And Matthews, while a good slot receiver, he's just So, I mean, you really are worried about Darren Sproles, Zach Ertz, and then that's it. Like, that's all I'm really worrying about on their receivers. Their running backs, I mean, Ryan Matthews, if he's actually playing, he can be good. But he had a fucking toothache last week and was out. Like, he's softer than puppy piss, to borrow a statement from Stephen White.
Okay.
And then I'm not worried about their running backs. Kenjon Barner's meh. Wendell Smallwood's just okay. Like, I don't see great running backs. Their defensive line, without Benny Logan's the guy that makes it all work because he draws double teams. He eats all the blockers. He does a good job of it too. Without Benny Logan creating havoc on the inside, I don't know if that defense is half as good as it could be. And I think Atlanta could run it right up the middle pretty much every play. And if they don't run it up the middle, I think they could get away with running outside zone because I don't think Brandon Graham or Connor Barwin are great run defenders. I think their linebackers are solid. I mean, I like Michael Hendricks. I think the Falcons could do well against them. And I think their corners absolutely suck. I think they have arguably the worst cornerback group in the league right now.
That may be a fair statement.
And I think if you put Julio Jones against Nolan Carroll or Leotis McKelvin, he will burn one of them for an 80-yard touchdown at some point in this game. So they're going to have to put Malcolm Jenkins or Rodney McLeod on that side deep no matter what. Just that fact of having Julio Jones in the game means that there will always be 7 in the box, which means Atlanta should be able to run all day.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I don't think their secondary can handle our weapons. And I think, I think this is another one of those games that we've talked about in the past where the Falcons' worst enemy is themselves and sort of getting out to a sloppy sort of start, turning the ball over early, giving up some big plays to the Eagles, which shouldn't be a problem with the wide receivers. Maybe, I think Ertz and Sproles are the 2 scariest players they have on their offense. Ertz is good. Sproles is, good. I've always been a fan of Darren Sproles, even at age 33. I think Darren Sproles will still be an effective player at age 43, just by the way he's built. But I think if we can sort of keep those guys in check, and I feel like our rookies are capable of doing it. They certainly have the speed to do it. They just got to not make the mental errors that we've seen occasionally this year. We shouldn't have too much problem with their offense. And so basically I think with the Falcons, it's really themselves that they got to worry about and not sort of getting complacent. So I feel like this is a game that the Falcons, this could easily be like similar to what we saw on Thursday night without the late garbage time scores. This could be like a 45-17 sort of game for the Falcons if they take care of business. Or it could be one of those sort of tight, 31-28 games where, the Falcons just are not on the top of their game and, it comes down to the wire. But, I think this is definitely a winnable game for the Falcons. And I think whichever team gets off to the earliest start, the fastest start early, I think will have a decisive advantage as the rest of the game goes. I think that's really the only way that Philadelphia can play with us for 4 quarters is they have to basically win like the first and second quarter and then hope to hold on for the last 2 quarters, because I just don't think they have the talent or the firepower to outplay us for 4 quarters. But we'll see what happens.
I have to agree. I think the Falcons can be the one that gets that quick start, though.
Yeah.
Especially if the pass rush can get there, I think that would be ridiculous.
All right. Now that we got that settled, let's talk about some of these NFL 1000 midseason grades, Scott.
Yes, I was a big fan of this series last year. I think they do a good job, and I'm glad that they're doing it throughout the season this year. That way you can see a little bit more transparency into the process. Just kind of going over the rankings. Matt Ryan was the number 9 quarterback. Again, I think it's a little low, but we're going to go through a couple of them. Freeman was the number 8 running back. Tevin Coleman was the number 20 running back. Teron Ward was the number 74 running back, but he's your 3rd running back, so who gives a damn? Julio Jones was the 2nd wide receiver behind A.J. Green, which I'm not going to pinch pennies on that one. Who gives a damn? Mohamed Sanu, surprisingly, was one of the top number 2 wide receivers, ranking at 34th out of all wide receivers. So I think 32 teams in the league. Sanu's up there for number 2s. Hardy, Gabriel, and Robinson all in that 114 to 124 range. No one's going to write home about any of those 3 guys, but halfway through the season, they did all look pretty good. Jacob Tammy's the number 33 tight end. Hooper's number 49 tight end. Toilola's number 64 tight end. Atlanta's got 3 mediocre tight ends as of now. Hooper's got potential to be great, though. And along the offensive line, Jake Matthews was number 17. Let's be fair here, though. There's a lot of good left tackles this year. Jake Matthews was number 17, and he had a higher grade than everybody on the offensive line outside of Schrader. Levitri was the number 24 guard. Chester was the number 31 guard. So both of those guys are average offensive guards. Mack was the number 7 center, which I'm not disagreeing with at all. And Ryan Schrader was the number 8 right tackle, which is a step down from where he was last year, but still better than what we would be expecting. Bryant and Bosher both up there for their kicking and punting duties. Couple of unique, I'm not going to run through all the defensive ones, but uniquely looking at it, Vic Beasley was the number 17, 43 defensive end. Freeney was 27th. Shelby was surprisingly number 14. Grady Jarrett was number 13 defensive tackle, with Hageman as the number 38. Deion Jones was the number 22 inside linebacker, with Devondre Campbell as the number 11, 43 outside linebacker. Trufant ranked 7th at corner. Alford ranked 32nd at corner. And Poole ranked 45th at corner. Keanu Neal was 4th at strong safety. Ishmael was 7th at strong safety. And Ricardo Allen was a whopping 48th at free safety. Although Aaron would probably disagree with that one.
Yeah. I really like this series. I don't agree with all the grades. I don't quite, I don't know if these grades are normalized because, Ricardo Allen's overall grade, average grade this year is a 67.8, and he was the number 48 free safety, and Devondre Campbell's was 67.0, which either suggests that we have a lot of really good safeties in the league or these grades aren't really normalized. So, I I can't pay too much attention to how these players are graded. I think most of the people that are involved with, or all the people involved with that, I don't have any issue with sort of their evaluation skills. Most of those guys I respect. A few of them I know, including our good friend Charles. So I can't really say like, oh, this grade is wrong. But like for the most part, I can't really put too much stock in it. It's an interesting system. Some of the grades I probably would say, yeah, that feels about right. But without having watched all these players, I can't necessarily say, oh yeah, I feel like Grady Jarrett's the 13th best defensive tackle in the NFL. I don't really know, but that seems in the ballpark. But yeah, it's an interesting grading system. Obviously, probably the Ricardo Allen grade is probably the one I disagree with the most, more so than the others. But it's understandable. He had a really bad game against Carolina that really sort of lowered his grade. I think he was the number 32 free safety that week with like a 50-something grade. So I think that really sort of skewed his average down quite a bit. But yeah.
I mean, I think for the most part, they are pretty accurate, especially along the offensive line. I think the guys that do the offensive line are probably some of the best out there that would cover it. At tight end, at wide receiver, at running back, at quarterback, like I don't agree with Kean Fahey's quarterback grades, for instance. I also think Kean Fahey's kind of an idiot. Just being honest here. I just don't think he's a good
popular opinion on Falcons Twitter.
Well, no, it's not even Falcons Twitter. I just don't think he's a good evaluator. I don't think he knows what to look for in a quarterback. I think he watches a lot of film and just charts and then goes based on his charts. And that's what he does. He doesn't go based off of, oh, this is the play. This is how the play's supposed to develop. Guy hit his third read with a perfect pass as opposed to, and that's a really good play. He might give Ryan a negative on that play when any other talent evaluator in the world that has watched that play would go, man, that was a great play. That's at least a plus play. So I don't like having a guy who has never played it down a football in his life try to grade quarterbacks.
Okay. I don't have an issue with Kean Fahey. I may not always agree with all of his opinions, but I think for the most part, I think he does good work. Honestly, whether Matt Ryan is the 9th best quarterback in the league this year, I probably would disagree with that. But number 9 is probably where I would probably have him generally, maybe a few slots lower in terms of overall ability. I think his play this year has been probably better than that. But, again, I'm probably being too much of a contrarian, but I think some of his play early in the season, I think some of the recent weeks, I think he's been much, much better. But I think some of his early play at the beginning of the season, I think was slightly overrated just because he was putting up great numbers. But, I think he's played well. So I don't want to sound like I think he's playing badly, but I just think, everybody's giving him, early in the season, like the first month or so, people were giving him like A++++. And I think he was probably just like a A-. But, that's a minor nitpick. So I don't really have that big an issue with sort of Matt Ryan being number 9 when like the difference between like number 9 and number 3 is like 2 points or something like that. So
true. Now, just looking at the overall grades, I don't really have any real complaints with any of them. They all feel right on par with the eye test. And I know you're a huge Ricardo Allen fan. Like, I don't think he's the number 48 free safety in the league, but he probably is closer to like the number 26, number 27, if you normalize all the grades out.
That's fair.
Which is still someone you want to upgrade. I can think of maybe 4 guys in the league that he would start over.
I kind of think there's only maybe 4 or 5 guys that would start over him. I think there's a lot of free safeties that are good and probably better at what they're asked to do than probably Ricardo Allen is at what he's asked to do. But I don't think very few safeties could do what he's asked to do, which is play center field and play a lot of cover 1 and cover 3 and play it significantly better than him. So, I feel like that's part of the reasons why I'm not sort of as gung-ho about upgrading Ricardo Allen, because I only feel like there's only really maybe a handful of really great cover 1 center fielding safeties, and everybody else is basically either on Ricardo Allen's level or worse than him. So like that's one of the reasons why I think the idea, like it'd be great to upgrade over him. As I've said multiple times on this show, going back to last year, I was literally saying that at the end of last season and throughout last all season. But to me, it really requires having a guy available that is that upgrade. And I just don't think, based off of the premium that you typically see for guys that are good at that. We saw Carl Joseph, who I thought was that type of safety, go in the top 15 picks. We saw Rodney McLeod, who I thought was a clear upgrade, get paid $40 million. The Saints went out and paid Jarvis Byrd $40 million because they thought he was that type of guy. He wasn't. And Jarvis Byrd was probably, when the Saints signed him, universally considered to be like the second or third best safety or free safety in the NFL. And then he fell flat on his face in New Orleans. So I do think people need to factor that in. That just speaks to my point of it's really hard to play that role and just thinking, okay, well, Ricardo Allen, there's room for improvement. I agree with that. I've been saying that for over a year. But I just don't think finding a guy that's going to be that upgrade is as easy as people think it is.
I mean, I'm just looking in the drafts and looking at guys who are draft eligible, and there's probably 3 guys that I would take over him next year. Marcus May out of Florida. I'd take Eddie Jackson out of Alabama, and I'd take Malik Hooker out of Ohio State. Those would be the 3 guys that I'd take over him next year. I think all 3 of them could start. All 3 of them could play better center field. I think all 3 of them are better tacklers. I think all 3 of them have better playmaking ability. I think all 3 of them are better. And I don't want to sound like a height supremacist here, but they're taller, they're heavier, they're more built for the position.
That's fair. I said when we drafted Ricardo Allen, if he was 2 inches taller and 10 pounds heavier, he'd be a really good free safety prospect. He would have been a better free safety prospect than Desmond Southwood was, which, isn't saying much given where Southwood ended up. But, at the time, people thought Southwood was a legit 4th round-ish sort of talent based off of his athleticism. I just don't like – I think unless you're getting an elite free safety prospect, and to me, just getting someone who's better than – like I don't think it's worth the investment. I wouldn't use a 1st-round pick or a 2nd-round pick on a guy from going – if you think Ricardo Allen's a 4 or 5 out of 10, fine. I think that's probably a pretty fair representation of his ability. Going from a 4 or 5 to unless you're getting like a 9 or a 10, I don't think that's worth a 1st-round pick or even really a 2nd-round pick. I just think if you're going from a 4 to a 6, it's not worth a top 2 pick. That's like something you try to do in the 3rd or 4th round.
I think May is going to be there in the 3rd, 4th round though.
I haven't watched a ton of Florida this year, but based off of watching Keanu Neal last year, I wouldn't consider Marcus May to be an upgrade over Ricardo Allen. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's a better center fielder than Allen is. But, we'll see. I haven't done, this is, I'm focused on the NFL, so I've only done a smidge of college scouting. And as we get towards the end of the season, and certainly in the offseason, I'll start looking at it, and I may find somebody that, I fall in love with, similar to Carl Joseph last year, but I doubt it. It's very hard to impress me as a draft prospect generally because I think draft prospects generally are overrated. But, that's quite a discussion for another day. Scott, do you want to squash the beef?
Yeah, we got 3 guys we got to hit up.
All right. Start us off.
Brian Cox. Has he really helped the pass rush? Now, I might have to swallow my pride on this one. 9 weeks in this year, the Falcons went from the literal worst pass rush in the NFL, and no one's going to argue that, in 2015, to a top 10 pass rush, we'll say. In my pass rush stats, they're 7th throughout the first 9 games. They've got 21 sacks. They've got 33 hits on the quarterback. They're near the top of the league in total quarterback hits. They've only got 6 interceptions, so they're not being buoyed up by that. They've only got 4 strip sacks, which is about average for the league, so not being buoyed up by that. Pass rush has improved quite a bit. Now, is it Dwight Freeney teaching Beasley a couple of things, being a good mentor? Is it Claiborne going with Chuck Smith in the offseason? Is it Hageman and Jackson in the base eating up blocks in their MMA training? Is it Grady Jarrett, who's just naturally a damn good defensive tackle? Or is it the combination of everything that's making Brian Cox look good? Is Brian Cox actually good? We have no idea because we're not sitting there. But I might have to concede this one. Hope we hear that word tonight too.
Okay.
Might have to concede this one to you, Aaron, and say that maybe Brian Cox actually is a decent defensive line coach. And maybe we just need a little bit more talent up front, which I think we'll all agree is the case.
You started off a little out there, Scott, but you brought it back. I think as when we were getting asked these questions the first couple of weeks of the season, we don't know anything. Like, we don't know if Brian Cox is a bad coach. We don't know if he's a good coach. We don't know anything. All we can really do is just assume that, that the defensive line and the pass rush didn't suddenly just magically get better, just through sheer magic and just like, leprechauns and dragons, and, they breathe their magical breath onto all the players and suddenly got improvement. So you would just assume, just based off of basic, Occam's razor, the simplest answer is usually the correct one, that they got coached up and Brian Cox is decent at his job, competent at his job. As I said at the beginning of the year, like I didn't get the backlash. Like, people was saying like, oh, well, our pass rush, our average per sacks per game is decreased every year under Brian Cox. And like at the time people were saying that, they were judging it off of 3 games. And as we saw in the subsequent weeks, the sort of pass rush started to show up a little bit more, Hey, look, I'll be the first one to sit here and tell you I don't think the Falcons pass rush is as good as the numbers say it is. I still think they have a ton of room to grow. I'm not going to sit here and say Brian Cox deserves in the Hall of Fame for the job he's done in Atlanta. But at the same time, I don't believe that he deserved the amount of criticism that he got early in the season, simply because, the Falcons pass rush wasn't as good as people wanted it to be. And so therefore there has to be someone to blame for that. And at that time it was Brian Cox. So, I think, as I said then, I think when you're relying solely on Vic Beasley's improvement and Derek Shelby to be the things that make your pass rush go, it's going to leave a little bit more left to desire. Beasley has improved. Shelby started to turn things on before he got hurt. Freeney's been a solid contributor, and Adrian Claiborne has made a big leap. And we're starting to see Grady Jarrett do some things as well, and even Courtney Upshaw, who, was god-awful in Baltimore as a pass rusher, but suddenly gets to Atlanta and is occasionally competent. So, one assumes the coach is somewhat responsible for that. So I just hope maybe.
You said Claiborne's occasionally hits the quarterback?
No, Upshaw. Did I say Claiborne? I meant Upshaw.
Yeah, I was like, Claiborne's hitting the quarterback like 15 times this year.
No, you're right. I meant Upshaw. So, I just think the whole Brian Cox, we need to fire Brian Cox, similar to the Vic Beasley's a bust, similar to a lot of the sort of hashtags that we've seen on Falcons Twitter this year. Sort of just people need to calm down in terms of, getting those hashtags going. Let things play out a little bit. As we saw against that Seattle game, it was a little too early to panic, as some people were doing in the first quarter of that game, because the Falcons were down 7-0, 8 minutes into the game. Some of the panicking that people have done early in the season, Jalen Collins being one of them, I think people need to calm down a little bit. And that's coming from me, the king of trashing players long before I should. You should take it to heart. Now, one of the Brian Cox's protege, Rashid Hagan, is another player that we want to discuss tonight. My personal opinion, I think some of the backlash on Hageman has been, at least on his on-the-field play, off the field stuff, that may be well-deserved.
Off the field stuff says cut him. But
I'm not going to really address the off-the-field stuff too much. But I think his play on the field has not been as bad as people have sort of discussed it. I think he's done a fine job in terms of his contributions in the rotation. Again, I think this is another example of people having overly high expectations on a player coming into the league, and thus, because he hasn't lived up to those expectations, people then go to that place of, well, must be something wrong with Rashid Hageman, as opposed to probably the more fair and accurate assessment, well, there was something initially wrong with my expectations. But, I can say that generally because I was a lot lower on Hageman coming in than pretty much 98% of the fan base was. So, not to toot my own horn, but, toot, whatever.
All right. Well, here's the thought. Could he be in the long-term plans as the 5-tech?
Look, the one thing I'll say about his off-field stuff, I think the atmosphere around the NFL is not very favorable for him on this. In terms of his ability to perform the job, I think he's shown more than he's capable of being that guy long-term in terms of being our sort of base guy, if we're going to still use this base nickel dichotomy that we've been using the last 2 years. No, I personally think that should go away in the future next year, but if it doesn't, then I think Hageman's fine in that role, but we'll see.
All right. I would argue that he's probably been better than Babineau and Jackson this year. I know I'm probably going to be one of the few guys that says that, but
I would disagree with it.
I think he needs more playing time than what he's been getting. I don't think he should have been inactive for those games against the Bucs or the Packers. I think you should deactivate Babineau in those games, but that's not going to happen because Babineau's been here too long. Now, when Babineau and Jackson are probably gone next year, maybe we'll see a little bit more Hageman, and maybe Hageman will finally look like the guy he could be.
Maybe.
One can hope. And maybe he should have been activated instead of Upshaw, but that's something I'm sure you do agree with.
Yeah, look, not to be the conspiracy theorist that I was railing against a couple of minutes ago, but I do think it's probably not a coincidence that he's been inactive since the Josh Brown stuff happened. And I don't think it has to do with performance. I just think I don't think the Falcons coaching staff really wants to answer those questions in their post-game press conferences or their pre-game press conferences anymore. And so I think he might have to sit the bench for a couple more weeks before we see him get another opportunity. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Upshaw should be seeing playing time. If you've got Hageman, you could at least play Hageman in the nickel as the one and at least let him just attack. But
fair enough.
That's just me. All right, let's go on to the third guy, Jalen Collins, who just 1 week ago I was writing off. And just 1 week ago you were going, no, don't do it, don't do it. I was wrong. I know you don't hear that a lot. As I say that, my girlfriend's sitting here laughing at me. So yes. Yeah, I was wrong. Jalen Collins is not a bust. He's just not active most games. Let's see him play some special teams. Let's see him play some fourth corner. Let's see him earn his way into the lineup. If, for whatever reason, Trufant has to miss 4 or 5 games and Collins can play well in his stead, maybe he's the guy that you keep and you let Alford go. And that's it, And I would be okay with that if Collins looks like he did against the Buccaneers every week. I don't think he will, but if he can, that'd be great. We actually already addressed the free safety thought, but if Collins can improve his play, are you comfortable seeing Alford go and just have Collins and Trufant and Goodwin and, little Brian Poole in there?
Whew, that's a loaded question. I'm a big Robert Alford fan. I think most people probably know that watch this show or follow me on Twitter. I've been expecting him to walk at the end of this year since March of last year. So I've basically had like a year and a half to get comfortable with him leaving. I think whether or not I'm comfortable because of Jalen Collins, probably not. I think Collins has to play a lot better over these next however many games that he gets that opportunity to do so, to get to that point. But, we could see Jalen Collins play 6 more games and be terrible for 6 games. I think the more important thing I was trying to get people to recognize last week was I wouldn't judge him until we actually get an opportunity to see him play, and just, sort of making these judgments based off of him being inactive or inactive, meaning, the team feels a certain way about him, I just think was a little bit, people were reaching a little bit too much. Unless Collins plays amazing football over this stretch, the second half of the season, I probably wouldn't be that comfortable with sort of handing him the starting job to replace Alford. But as a guy that could potentially compete for it, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's always been sort of their plan, and whatever fire needs to be lit under him, hopefully gets lit. The thing with Jalen Collins was he was always a gamer. One of the big knocks that they said of him coming out of LSU, Les Miles said this himself, he didn't practice hard. But once he got in the games, when he was replacing Rashard Robinson, who was suspended 2 years ago, and he was in the games and he played so well, they couldn't really refuse him at that point. And so I think that may be the situation with Jalen Collins. He's not going to be a guy that's going to really impress the coaching staff with his work ethic and training and practice. But when he gets on the field in the games, he'll be competent to potentially good. And at least against Tampa Bay, that seemed to be the case, and we'll have to see if that changes in the future. But that may be something for people to remember moving forward with Jalen Collins.
I hope there's something there, because otherwise that second round pick feels wasted. That's all I'm gonna say.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, if your second round picks don't hit, Peter Cons, it feels pretty bad. Let's get to these mailbag questions. We got plenty this week. Andrew Stewart asks, who in the NFC do you think presents the biggest mismatch for the Birds?
I might get flack for this one, but I think the Falcons just had their second game against them, and it would be the Buccaneers. I mean, they're built naturally when they're healthy to beat the Falcons. And the Buccaneers aren't healthy, which that was a huge stroke of luck for the Falcons. Outside of them, the Packers. I'm not impressed with Dallas. I think Atlanta matches up really well with Dallas, especially their defense. I'm not impressed with the Giants. I don't think the Foreskins are any good. I honestly don't think the Eagles are any good. The Vikings are I don't think the Vikings make the playoffs. I think the Lions and the Packers are going to be competing in the North, and the Lions are probably going to get the wild card. The Bears suck, obviously. The Panthers suck, obviously. The Saints, I don't see challenging Atlanta for the division, but who knows? We've got a good bit of the season left. I don't think the Seahawks honestly match up with the Falcons that well with all the injuries they've got. When you're missing Cam Chancellor and when you're missing Michael Bennett, I mean, Atlanta can go in and beat them. And I think they're 3 missed ref calls and a missed field goal away from being a 2-6 team. I don't think Arizona's good. And obviously the Rams suck. So, I mean, I think the Falcons have arguably the best team in the NFC right now. Now, I think the NFC is historically weak, but I don't feel crazy saying that. I think Atlanta could beat or has beaten every team in the league. Or not in the league, but in the conference. I think they match up well with all the NFC East. I think the NFC North is overrated, and they beat the Packers. I think the NFC West, I think the Falcons outplayed the Seahawks when they went to Seattle. So, I mean, who really is there that you're just like, man, the Falcons can't beat this team? I think on any given Sunday, they can beat anybody in the NFC.
I agree. I think there's 2 teams. I think if you're talking about the Seahawks, if Russell Wilson is healthy, if Cam Chancellor is healthy, if Michael Bennett is healthy, and maybe several of those factors will be the case if and when the Falcons play them again come January, I think they're the clear toughest matchup for the team. I think a mobile Russell Wilson and obviously their defense at full strength is the only defense other than maybe Minnesota's that could really give this offense fits in the NFC. I think other than that, and I don't think Minnesota's really that tough a matchup unless their defense can basically do what it has done to us the last 2 years, which I don't expect them to do, given how bad their offense is. So the other team to me that is a tough matchup for the Falcons is the Cowboys, just because I think offensively, with their offensive line, their running game, and with Des Bryant, and the incomparable Jason Witten, I do think they could give this defense a ton of problems. In fact, if we played the Cowboys today, I think it would be a huge accomplishment for our defense to hold them to under 40 points. And so I think that's why Dallas is a tough matchup for us, just because I think it would be a shootout. And even though I think we could score pretty easily against their defense, or at least I hope we could, I do think that it could be a game that, it's a 45-41 game, which could go either way for either team. So I think Dallas is probably the tougher matchup among the non-Seahawk teams in the NFC. Markel Jefferson asks, what are the difference from the year the Giants beat the Patriots in 2007 and 2011 than the 2016 Falcons? The pass rush?
I mean, the Falcons, at least statistically, have that pass rush. I mean, I know Aaron's like they don't play to the stats, but I think statistically they've got a good pass rush. They don't have the ridiculous pass rush that they had. I think Atlanta's got a way better offense than that 2007 or 2011 Giants team, though. Like, way better. One of the better offensive lines in the league, one of the better running back groups in the league, one of the better receiver groups in the league. 3 tight ends that can all fill a role. They may not be the best, but they can all fill a role. I mean, it's just a really tough idea. When you look at the Falcons versus the Patriots, I think they can score a lot of points on the Patriots. I don't think they can stop a lot of points.
Yeah. I think the Patriots, like I said with the Cowboys, would probably put a 50 burger on our defense. Love Keanu Neal, but Gronk is going to eat him alive if that matchup happens today. Now, we'll see what happens over the next couple of months, but look, I think the pass rush is probably the main thing. The Giants had an elite pass rush. I think our pass rush would be better described as competent. There is no Michael Strahan on our defensive line. There is no Jason Pierre-Paul in his prime. I know, Vic Beasley might have the sacks that look similar to JPP that year, but he's not JPP. There is no Justin Tuck. Derek Shelby and his replacements are not Justin Tuck. So
Claiborne might be Justin Tuck. I think Claiborne as Justin Tuck makes sense. That's like the one piece that I think the Falcons do have is that Justin Tuck type piece in Claiborne. The guy who
I think you're sleeping on prime Justin Tuck. Claiborne is not prime Justin Tuck.
He's not prime Justin Tuck, but he's like late run 2011 Justin Tuck, which I don't think was prime.
Okay, maybe I wouldn't go there. I know Tuck's numbers didn't reflect his goodness in 2011 because he only had 5 sacks, but the year before he had 11 sacks. So that I think he played like the 11 sack guy, not the 5 sack guy. I think I think the strength of the 07 Giants was their offensive line and running game. I think you can make an argument that combination for them then was slightly better than our combination today. The strength of the 2011 Giants team was their passing game with Cruz playing out of his mind and even Mario Manningham looking like a good number 2 receiver at that point, but really was the number 3 guy, and Hakeem Nicks still being Hakeem Nicks before he fell off the face of the earth. So I wouldn't say that their passing game in 2011 was better than our passing game today because they obviously didn't have a Julio Jones, and I'll take a Julio Jones over any of those 3 receivers. But I think, pound for pound, all around those 3 guys were probably better overall than our top 3 guys because I would probably take any of those 3 guys over Mohamed Sanu. But I think, if we're splitting hairs, I think all in all, the Falcons probably have a even mix of the 07 and 2011 Giants offense. So it's really the pass rush that's the big difference. That pass rush could go on the road and beat good quarterbacks. I don't think our pass rush is good enough to do that. I don't think they've shown that they're good enough to do that yet, but we'll see what happens. Jesse Lalamindra, he asks, if the NFL flexes a Falcons game to Sunday Night Football, what game do you see getting flexed on the Falcons' remaining schedule?
The Falcons' remaining schedule is pretty weak outside of that Chiefs game. That would be the only game that I could see getting flexed, and I kind of hope that it doesn't. Just because, I'm a big fan of those 1 o'clock games. And 1 o'clock on a Sunday, you wake up, you take the dogs out, you have your morning deuce, you eat some food. It's about 11 by that point, so you got 30 more minutes till the inactives come in, so you turn on some pregame show. The inactives come in, and you're like, all right, cool, so this is what's going to happen this week. And then there's the game. I'd much rather have a 1 o'clock game than waiting till 4 o'clock. I'm kind of tired of all these 4 o'clock games every single week. Like the fact that the next 3 weeks are 1 o'clock games, it's that standard Sunday routine that I am just very happy with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's really any game that's likely to get flexed. The Arizona game could be a decent one, but I think the Sunday night game that week is like Patriots, I think. And they're not going to flex the Patriots off a Sunday night. And I'm pretty sure like the Arizona Atlanta game is probably like I could be
That
wrong
week
about
it's
this.
Carolina Seattle. Which if Carolina loses 2 more, taking that
Oh,
one
that's
out for
the Kansas City week, yeah.
Yeah, that's the Kansas City week. What's the week that you were suggesting?
I was saying the Arizona game.
No, I don't think they're going to flex that because Arizona's doesn't even have a winning record.
No, but in the way the flex work, that Fox and CBS can protect one game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Arizona Atlanta game is like the best game that Fox has that week. So I would be so shocked if they didn't protect that one. And I think probably I think if you're looking at a likely game, as Scott says, I don't think that Kansas City game is likely to get flexed. Carolina Seattle, I think going to Seattle is probably something that they'll want to do, and by then maybe Carolina will have gotten their act together and might make that at least a decent storyline. I would probably look at the Week 16 game against Carolina, but I don't know how the flex works because that's a Saturday game, and I don't know how they're going to deal with switching it from Saturday to Sunday. So that might not even be possible. So I would be shocked if the Falcons get flexed onto a Sunday night.
Almost all the games that week are Saturday. There's only 2 games on Christmas itself.
Yeah. I don't know how that's going to work, though. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if there's, like, special rules because it's a Saturday and then it's flip it to a Sunday. I don't know. So, like, that, to me, if that was a Sunday game, I would say that's probably the likeliest, but I don't think that's likely. So, I would be surprised if the Falcons get a Sunday night game this year.
And that one's also a Denver at Kansas City game.
Yeah, and Denver's a team that they're
that's a big AFC West matchup. That's not happening.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, pick one of those 3 games. I think all of them are unlikely to be flexed, but any random of those 3 is probably as likely as the other one. At Matt Stars asked, do you think our run game could carry us? Cold weather, coming outdoor stadiums. Not sure Kyle Shanahan could commit fully. I like when Matt throws on rhythm and rips it, but when he's off schedule, does anyone else worry about the results?
I mean, we're talking about 1 game in Philly, and then the only other outdoor games are Los Angeles and Charlotte for the rest of the season.
Rest of the
regular season. Now, assuming that the Falcons don't screw it up and make the playoffs and are division leader, that means they'll have at least 1 home game. Assuming that they might even be a 2 seed, that there's no one that I'm thinking that they're going to visit. I mean, if they're a 3 seed, they could potentially visit Seattle or Dallas, who are the 2 teams ahead of them. And yeah, Dallas can get cold in the winter, but it's not that bad. Seattle is a lot more temperate in the winter than people realize. It may get cold, but it's not going to be snowing and, frostbite and all the crazy crap that always happens out there.
Wow.
But, yeah, I'm not too worried about cold weather. I don't see the Falcons having to go to Minnesota. I don't see them having to go to New York or Washington or Philly or even if they go to Detroit or Minnesota, those are indoor games. There's really not any games that you're like, man, this is an absolute horrible time to go up there, that I think Atlanta will be stuck outside of Seattle. And that's just because Seattle, it rains a lot during that time.
Yeah, I think Seattle's probably, just because it's the Seahawks at home, it's a bigger issue than the actual conditions of any would-be January game there. Not to say it'll be, warm and breezy, but I don't think it'll be too bad unless it rains. I think this is a legitimate concern, just because I think our running game is good, but I don't know if we're the type of team that can just we're going to run the ball and not have to worry about our passing game. As I said earlier, I feel like if you can get this team one-dimensional, they are much easier to beat. Now, it's easier said than done when you have to defend against Julio Jones. So I do feel like, I'm a little worried about those results, again, because I posted a stat on Twitter the other day that basically said the Falcons are the third worst offensive line in terms of giving up sacks on third downs this year. So to me, it's really about, can they stay on schedule, run the ball effectively on first early downs, throw the ball effectively on early downs, and not getting unfavorable matchups. Now, despite that, bad stat, they're still the seventh best third down conversion defense, or offense, I'm sorry, and it's probably they would be much higher if it wasn't for two really bad games against Seattle and Denver. So I do feel like it is a concern. I don't think it's a huge issue. I don't think the weather is really a factor on this because, as Scott said, there really isn't a game that you're looking ahead to that's going to be that problematic, other than Seattle, presumably. I think it's a legitimate question to wonder, can this team be that sort of team that can run the ball 35 to 40 times every week against high caliber defenses? But I do feel like we are in a much better position to do that this year than we have ever done, just because of how balanced our offense is. I think, you go back to that prime Mike Smith teams, they were run-first teams, but they couldn't really throw the ball. And so teams could just stack the box and stop our run, and we didn't really have anything to throw at them to prevent them from doing that. We saw that against the Giants in the playoffs a couple of years ago. And I don't think that's really as big a concern with this offense. So it's a concern, but not a big deal. Abraham Luez asks, if Kyle leaves after this season, who can replace him?
Ooh, that's tough. Ideally, you somehow steal Greg Knapp because I feel like they're on the same offense. But, there's not really anybody that you're like, man, this guy's going to be available that's off the top of my head that knows this type of offense. Maybe Chudzinski can come in, run something similar. But, yeah, Greg Knapp would be the guy. And you got to see him from the Broncos. I can't really think of anybody that's like, man, this guy is going to be available and the right person and can run this offense the way it needs to be run. I'm just kind of looking here. Maybe if you could steal Pat Shurmur, even then, I'm not really a fan of him. Maybe Matt LaFleur just gets moved up, gets bumped up. Who knows? Maybe they bump up Raheem Morris. I know that sounds crazy, but there's a huge thing there that the Falcons' offense is better, not because of Kyle Shanahan, but because Raheem Morris has been the guy who's been able to bridge that gap between the players and Shanahan. So,
fair speculation. Yeah.
Because Morris is known for being a huge players coach. And if Morris and Shanahan are friends, he can bridge that gap. Everybody can kind of get on the same communication. And when everybody's communicating well, that's all you really need.
Yeah. I don't think there's an obvious choice other than maybe Greg Knapp. Dan Quinn and Greg Knapp worked together in San Francisco. Yep. I think they worked in some other place that I can't think of off the top of my head also. To be honest with you, Dan Quinn doesn't have a lot of, experienced offensive coordinator connections based off of his past jobs. It's like Greg Knapp, Charlie Weiss, Who's the guy that Pete Carroll fired? His dad is somebody. I can't think of who he is.
Pete Carroll fired.
Whoever Pete Carroll's first offensive coordinator was it Bates?
Yeah, I think it was.
But whoever that guy, like that's really all the experienced offensive coordinators that Dan Quinn has really worked with. And, Knapp runs a very similar scheme to Atlanta. I would assume that he would prefer to run Atlanta's offense than, try to coach up Paxton Lynch in Denver next year if that situation arose. So I feel like we could get him, assuming, Denver wasn't being jerks about it. But other than that, there isn't an obvious candidate because you don't really have anybody that has pro play calling experience already on this offensive coaching staff. So I don't really feel like there's going to be a first-time offensive coordinator, maybe, but I would be surprised if he went that way, just because of how good this offense has been and sort of wanting not to skip a beat by bringing in someone who runs a similar West Coast scheme that knows zone blocking. And, unlike Shanahan, Dan Quinn actually knows. So you don't have those issues that people speculated about last year in terms of that led to the hiring or the promotion of Raheem Morris. So Greg Knapp is the perfect candidate for that. So if not him, then I don't know who. So, and I know Falcon fans are not big fans of Greg Knapp from his days under Jim Moore, but Falcon fans generally aren't fans of anybody who calls plays for the team. So
remember when Matt Schaub looked good in that offense under Knapp, and then got traded to Shanahan, and Shanahan made him look good? Not saying, but just saying. Like, maybe the issue wasn't Greg Knapp. Maybe it was Michael Vick can't throw the damn ball.
Yeah, I think, but as I said, Falcon fans aren't fans of anybody who calls plays for this team. I've never known, even people that are like, oh, I like Dirk Cutter. Like, you didn't like Dirk Cutter at the time. You only liked him after a year of Shanahan. But, whatever. All right, another question from Abraham. How good is this Falcons defense really compared to last year? Quarterback competition-wise, it's 100 times better so far.
I think it's a better defense than last year in some ways. I think it's worse in others. Overall, I'd say it's better because it's got a semblance of a pass rush, but I don't think – I mean, obviously there's improvement that needs to be made over the last 7 games. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, they've made strides. They're definitely more talented. They're definitely faster. The pass rush is certainly much better. That's even though I don't think they're great, they're still a lot better than we were last year. The big issue with this defense is it's giving up big plays. That has been their Achilles heel this year. They're still struggling to get off the field on third downs, despite the improvements that the pass rush is making. The run game really hasn't been tested all that much this year, just because of the offense's ability to be up late in games. Like this defense has had the most amount of snaps in the second half of any team this year playing with a lead, or playing at least with like a 3-point lead or so. So it's one of those things where I don't think we've really seen them be tested from a run standpoint to really know whether or not they're better than last year's run defense. Last year's run defense was like top 3, I think, for like the first 10 weeks of the season. I think this year they're like top 10. So, I don't know how they compare yet because, again, they haven't been tested. I think the quality of quarterbacks has made a difference. Last year we had some really terrible quarterbacks that we played against. This year we played some really good ones. I don't think it fully explains why there is a statistical drop-off, but I do think it certainly is a factor as to why this defense isn't producing to the same level. If we played Zach Mettenberger and Kirk Cousins, Sands, Jordan Reed, and Deshaun Jackson instead of Aaron Rodgers and Phillip Rivers, we probably look a little bit better than we have so far this year. Jonathan Moulton, you think Levine and Hooper can be the future? Obviously Hooper, but can Toilolo keep growing like the past few weeks?
Toilolo is what he is. The Falcons have just found the best way to use him. This is peak Toilolo. So this is the best we'll see.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think – look, I think Toilolo, my opinion on Toilolo is similar to everybody else's opinion on Ricardo Allen. I think there's a lot of room for upgrade. My personal opinion is, I know everybody sort of thinks, oh, Hooper's the future and tight end is not an issue. I think given how much this offense uses 2 and 3 tight ends, I do think that is a prime target for the Falcons to address this offseason. It's a deep tight end draft class. Now, I wouldn't use a number 1 pick on the tight end, but if, a guy like Jake Butt or O.J. Howard or one of those guys slips into the middle of the second round, I'd be very keen to pick up one of those 2 guys or, somebody else of similar skill.
Because then you have the 2 tight ends that like the Pats.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at it, that's really what you're trying to go for. You want to be able to basically run your entire offense out of 2 tight end sets. And I think we've done a good job or Shanahan has done an excellent job of maximizing Toilolo, Hooper, and Tammy this year. But I feel like we could do it even better. And if we could, whether that means going out and signing Martellus Bennett or signing somebody else or drafting a tight end, I think would be a great move for this team in the offseason. But if we wind up bringing back both Tammy and Toilolo in free agency, I'm not going to complain about it. But I think we could do better. But if we wind up going with the same 3 guys plus Josh Perkins, I'm not going to complain. So it's fine. Ricardo Allen question, or Ricardo Allen comment. So I guess we'll see if we agree with this one. Matt Starr asks, my issue with Allen, he always appears to be late to the ball or not close enough to the guy catching the touchdown or first down.
I mean, that's pretty much my issue with him. I know Aaron likes him, but I think there's some issues there with recognition, play recognition more than anything else. And maybe he's not the ideal free safety for this scheme.
Oh, I would agree with that. I don't think he's the ideal. The ideal is Earl Thomas, but, you're not going to find Earl Thomas. Look, I don't think his recognition has been that problematic. It's a couple plays, yeah, sure. I think it's people are upset that his recognition isn't good enough to cover up for other people's mistakes, more so than it's because he's screwing up himself. I think the rookie teams have found ways to attack the rookies. We saw it with Keanu Neal against Green Bay. We saw it with Campbell against San Diego. We even saw it against Sean Weatherspoon in that Week 1 game on a touchdown to Austin Seferian-Jenkins. I think teams know that they can attack our zone in certain ways, and I think the issue with Allen, in particular on those plays, because I think those sort of crossing patterns have been some of the things that have drawn more of the criticism with him than other plays. I don't think it's really his fault. I think it's really the other guy's fault, and he's just not good enough to cover up for those mistakes. Earl Thomas is good enough to do those things, but as most people know, there's only one Earl Thomas. He'll be in the Hall of Fame someday, and finding that type of player is extremely hard to do. Sammer Not Nice asks, though I hate to jump the gun on injury news. Well, we got a couple of True Fun questions, so I guess I'll ask all 3. The first one is from Sammer Not Nice. He says, I hate to jump the gun on the injury news, but how does our cornerback depth look if Trufant misses extended time? ATL Sports 404 asks, Trufant got a second opinion on his leg injury. This usually spells bad news. Should we be worried? And Rise Up Reader asks, if Trufant is out for the season, does it derail any chance the Falcons have had an extended playoff run? So 3 slightly different questions, but all related to the same thing.
All right, so I hope that Trufant doesn't miss extended time. Putting that out there. I'm not afraid of the cornerback depth. If Collins can match up with the biggest receiver every week, I think that'll help out a lot. I don't think that the Falcons are screwed if Trufant misses a shit ton of time or if he misses the rest of the season. I do think it would affect the playoffs because I think you need a guy like Trufant in the playoffs because he's the guy who doesn't get a pick all year and then magically has a pick in the playoffs. He just feels like that kind of player. But I don't think that the Falcons would be absolutely done without him. So I don't think it hurts Atlanta as much as we think it would, but I also don't think it's a good situation by any means.
Yeah. You look at the rest of the schedule, there isn't, other than if you want to say Larry Fitzgerald or Jeremy Maclin or Kelvin Benjamin, there isn't really like a number one receiver that you would be like, oh, I need Trufant to match up with that guy and shadow him. So I don't feel like it's going to be crippling to this defense moving forward. We play a bunch of bad offenses over the next couple of weeks, so it shouldn't be a huge issue for the regular season. I think it would be a problem in the playoffs just because you want to be at full strength, and obviously Trufant is our best player on defense. I think, if we had to play someone like Dallas, he would be the perfect guy that you want to put on Des Bryant. I think then it would be a big issue then. Outside of that, I don't know if it's going to be a huge issue just because I don't think any other team, unless Jordy Nelson starts playing like Jordy Nelson again, I don't think there's really any other team that's postseason bound that you're like, oh no, Trufant doesn't play that game, we're screwed. So I feel like we have enough cornerback depth that we can get through it. I do think it hurts the team. I do think we should be worried about the second opinion, just because generally speaking, players get a second opinion so that to find out if they can avoid season-ending surgery. That's usually the case. Maybe that's not the case with Trufant. I don't know. I don't want to say one thing and then we find out tomorrow that he's just going to miss like 2 weeks or something like that. So, but yeah, I'm a little worried. Does it derail our chances in the postseason? Look, we're only going to go as far as our offense is going to carry us. So I don't think it derails us, but it does make it a little harder for us to win. Just because I think now we're legitimately probably going to be a little bit more susceptible to some, 38, 35 postseason games. And, that's not ideal. You want to be able to win those games 35-17. But, I think we still got a shot. But obviously it's not promising. I think we answered this question about Jalen Collins, right? Already?
We did. We basically said that we think he could produce.
And his cousin, not really, your boy J94 asked, should Atlanta look at Jamie Collins for the strong side linebacker this offseason?
Now, that's a move I would love. I don't know how you feel about it, Aaron, but depending on the contract he would want, I would love to bring in Jamie Collins. I think him at strong side linebacker and then as like a pass rusher in the nickel could be a good fit. I realize that he hasn't really played a lot of defensive end in the NFL, but when he was in college, he played a lot of defensive end and looked damn good enough to be a first round or close to a first round pick. So, I would love it. I think as a strong side linebacker, right defensive end, or even a Leo and then a right defensive end, I think he could be that Cliff Avril type that Atlanta really needs.
Yeah, look, in a vacuum, I would love Jamie Collins because, to me, I don't really even care about his pass rushing ability. To me, it's his coverage ability. to have him on the same field with Devondre Campbell, you can in theory leave them on islands against high-level tight ends potentially.
Yeah.
And so the Falcons can basically run base defense and not have to rely on their sort of nickel, and so their nickel can then become the base. And so therefore you can sort of have that unified pass rush that we kind of hope one instead of having a separate nickel defense and a separate base front. So yeah, perfect world. Jamie Collins, love him. Problem is he's going to win a lot of money. He's probably going to get a lot of money. And I also think because you'd be wanting him, as Scott describes it, you'd be wanting him to play basically the same role as Vic Beasley, which my hope is that Vic Beasley will finally be ready to take over that base linebacker, nickel pass rusher role full time next year, so that again we can unify the base and nickel packages into one and not have to be dealing with all these substitutions that have screwed us over too many times this year.
Yeah, if you're only subbing two guys, it makes it a lot easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, ideally you're not subbing anybody.
Well, no, I mean you're going to sub two guys. You're probably going to pull out one of the interior defensive linemen. Say it's Tyson Jackson or Rashid Hageman at the 5-tech, and you're going to throw in Adrian Claiborne into the nickel, and you're going to bring in a nickel corner and pull out one of the linebackers. Probably, if you have Collins, you pull out Campbell.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Yeah, I just think, I think spending all that money on Jamie Collins when you're hoping Vic Beasley can carve out a bigger role in the base defense just doesn't make a lot of sense. But, if for whatever reason Jamie Collins was willing to accept a deal that was in the $30 or $40 million range as opposed to probably the 60, 70, $80 million that he's probably going to wind up getting, I'd be much more in favor of it. But, unless he comes cheap, then I'd pass and just hope Beasley can do it. Okay. ATL Sports 404 asks, would you say D tackle is an issue for the Falcons?
I don't really think the one technique is an issue. I think Jarrett does a good job, and I think two of the four defensive tackles that we see in rotation do a good job. I think Jarrett does a good job, and I think Claiborne does a good job in the nickel. I think the other two probably need to be replaced with one guy who can play 3-tech all the time. Whether you go to the draft and get like Caleb Brantley in the second round, whether you go into free agency and you get Jonathan Hankins, that one guy that you can put in there and just play all the time, that's what you want. That guy who you can rotate, if you're rotating Claiborne, Jarrett, and Jonathan Hankins on the interior, that's what you want. So, yeah, you do need that 3 technique that can cause some issues.
Yeah, I think D tackle is an issue. Unfortunately, this was the year that Babineau fell off a cliff. At least in the first half of the season, maybe he's been saving it for the stretch run. One can hope, certainly myself. But other than that, you don't really have anything at D tackle. Tyson Jackson has been fine in his limited role. But I think everybody feels like these next however many games that we play this year should be the last games for in the Falcons uniform for Tyson Jackson. So I do feel like D tackle is an issue. Upshaw has been okay, but I think again we're being sort of that bar is very low with Upshaw. Derek Shelby will return next year, but as I've said on a previous show, he's coming off an Achilles injury, and I don't think you can really put too much stock in that. Like, he could come back and play well, similar to what we saw with Corey Peters in 2014, or he could, basically look like Corey Bierman did, the year after he came off of his Achilles tear.
Which is awful.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where you don't know. what's going to happen. So I wouldn't put too much stock in that. So I think for me personally, in a perfect world, if Derek Shelby was 100%, you put him in the base at the end, and in nickel, you would occasionally kick him inside. Then you would have Grady at the 1 technique. You would go out and get a new 3 technique, a Hankins type that can be an every down player. And you wouldn't have to substitute him, but you could if you needed to. Basically like a young Babineau or somebody of that caliber. And I would probably play Claiborne at the Leo in the base defense, and then, keep him there for nickel downs. And if you need to kick him inside on occasion because you have a Dwight Freeney or another edge rusher that you want to get on the field, then you can do that. And that's really sort of your main, like the 4 guys that are your base defense are basically the 4 guys plus Beasley, or 3 of the guys plus Beasley for your nickel defense. So that's the perfect scenario for me. And I don't think that D tackle other than Grady Jarrett is on the roster right now. Forever NAJS. I know it may be too early, but what D tackle and free safety in the 2017 draft/free agency fit the Dan Quinn scheme?
I mean, defensive tackles, you've got quite a few. You got Caleb Brantley. You've got, there's, I'm just sitting here looking at my list. Just going down it, you got Jonathan Allen, Malik McDowell, Lowell Lotulelei, Taco Charlton, Solomon Thomas, Caleb Brantley, Chris Wormley, Jerron Jones, Jake Raplogle, the little brother to the other Raplogle that was here in Atlanta for a while. DeMarcus Walker out of Florida State you could use as a 5 technique in the base and 3 tech in the nickel. Glasgow out of Michigan. I'm just going down my list. Eddie Vanderdoes you could get in the mid rounds and potentially get something out of. And then at free safety, I like Eddie Jackson, Marcus May, and Malik Hooker for the scheme. Maybe even Jabril Peppers, but Peppers ain't going to fall anywhere near the Falcons.
Yeah, I'll let Scott talk about the draft picks just because I don't have enough awareness. I know Hooker is a fit, but I already commented on him earlier in the show. So I'll just talk about the free agents. I think there's 3 main D tackles that you would look at as ideal 3 techs. Kawan Short, if he's available, Jonathan Hankins, and Stephen Paya. Those would be the 3 guys that sort of jump off the page for me in terms of starting caliber players that you could plug in at D tackle and not have to worry about sort of using another rotation of backups. Free safety, it's, the main guys are, I would say, like Bradley McDougall plays a lot of cover 1 in Tampa, but he's not particularly good at it. Rashad Johnson can play that role. Tony Jefferson could be that. Looking down the list of next year's free agents, there really just aren't that many sort of center fielding free safeties available. Like you could put Eric Berry in that role, but I think you would be limiting how good he could be because Eric Berry is really an ideal fit for that Keanu Neal strong safety role. And paying him $9 to $10 million to basically square peg him as a deep free safety, I think would be a waste of money and a waste of talent to a certain extent. Nobody else jumps off to me as, oh yeah, that guy's definitely an upgrade over Ricardo Allen at free safety, looking at this free agent list. So, yeah. The Dirty Bird 1998 asks, what are your thoughts on Kawan Short?
If Kawan Short's available and the Falcons can get him.
Yeah, look, here's the thing, guys, and this is what I was trying to get at last week. you can be 99.99% positive that Carolina's going to tag Kawan Short. The issue is based off of their experience of not paying their franchise tag players, including Josh Norman. There's a better than zero chance that he at some point becomes available. They might do a tag and trade, or they might rescind the tag. Not saying it's likely, but just because there's actually a precedent in Carolina that it has happened. And the last thing I heard with Short in his negotiations with Carolina, they were very far apart on them from the summer. So there's a chance might be bad blood and it might spiral out of control. It's probably like a 1% chance, but it's better than zero. So, the possibility of getting Kawan Short exists. It's a slim chance, but if he's available, then he should be the number one guy on the Falcons free agent board this offseason. Luke, the Dirty Bird 1998 asks, which Falcon would you vote for president, past or present?
If I had to pick, that's tough. Tony Gonzalez.
It's a good choice. I like that. I was going to say Matt Ryan just because he can bring people together, but that sounds corny and lame. So Tony Gonzalez is a pretty good choice. I don't know. Jonathan Babineau, who'll make weed legal. So he'll be a great choice.
Yeah, he's 35. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. I think this is our last question of the night. Dirty Birds 34 asks, why the hell did PFF say Russell Wilson is the midseason MVP?
Oh, because Pro Football Focus isn't the site that it once was.
They do their own thing. Look, Russell Wilson's played great this year, considering that he's been playing on one leg behind a horrific offensive line. So, when you consider the degree of difficulty, I can understand why people would put him in the conversation for that. Is he the midseason MVP? Midseason MVP is one of the most useless honors that you can get because it's just an award that they made up just so they can have, clickbait in the middle of the season. So, don't take it too seriously. No one cares who's the mid. Last year, wasn't it Tom Brady who was everybody's midseason MVP? So it doesn't matter, guys. Don't take the MVP stuff too seriously in week 10. Wait till week 17, then you can start, throwing a conniption and whatnot. But that'll do it for us this week. If you guys want to send in your own mailbag questions that we can make fun of and actually answer from time to time, you can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. You can tweet at me. I'm at FalcFan. Scott is at Karasik S. Check out our collective stuff. Scott is at Blogging Dirty. I will have an article during the bye week at falcfans.com. So look forward to that. It might be the last thing I write in 2016 before the world burns because, somebody gets elected president. But also find our archives on profootballcentral.com. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, rate and review us on iTunes. You can also find us on Stitcher. And we'll be back next week to talk bye-week blues, I guess.
Yep. A bye week that's well needed.
Yeah. Probably a shorter show next week.
Oh, yeah, definitely.